on the recorder. Welcome to the show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with my good friend, John Barnwell. How are you, John?
I'm doing great, thank you. And thanks to you, I have these interesting adventures that we've been embarking upon as of late. And in this particular adventure, as people would know, we're approaching the mysteries that are enshrined in this particular book by Douglas Gabriel. And it's interesting, you told the story about how I basically cajoled you into pursuing Tibetan Buddhism specifically. And it's kind of an odd thing, because here's this guy who's with this profound Christian studies background, in fact, a degree in religious studies, and has been through the priesthood system and all of that. Why would that happen? It's basically when I was at the bookstore, I looked upon myself as I was like the porter, the guy that has the lantern out in the train station and he's helping people to get on board the train, going to whatever their destination might be. And so it was largely a work of kind of guiding intuition. I would just point somebody at a book or hand them a book, and it either resonated or it did not. But in Douglas's case, I had to cajole him.
That's a fact. I would have never studied Buddhism without you doing that. And then when I realized that I was an absolute failure at studying Buddhism and comprehensively, I met Les Collins, a dear friend of yours and mine, who has now become, in the Western world, one of the top lamas from America, who had traveled when he was young into Tibet when it was extraordinarily dangerous. And he tells these amazing stories, one of my favorite people, and especially the stories that Les tells. And Les and I became fast friends. And this guy had infinite knowledge on Buddhism. Because why? He had met the Karmapa and the Dalai Lama and all of them. He had gone to Tibet. And he tells a story that he was passing through Afghanistan, going through the Khyber Pass, and he was trying to enter Tibet from the west. And what would you call it? Thieves attacked him and struck him on the head with an axe, which should have killed him. But some Tibetan Buddhists came along and found him there, and they took him over the pass and put him to die in a Tibetan temple on the ground right before the altar, on the floor right before the altar. And after a while, he got healed. And so they thought it was miraculous. And so they said, you must be someone very special. And of course, they always know who you were from a previous incarnation, though Les never talked about that. So then they said, that's it. We got to teach you everything. So Les has a picture with the Karmapa, the head of Kaju, and the Dalai Lama, the head of the Gelugpa schools of Tibetan Buddhism, both of them with their arms around him. And they're smiling at him like, this is my son. And I'd go, Les, how did you survive? People didn't even go to Tibet in those days. This was in the 50s, okay? And, matter of fact, that makes him ancient. I wasn't the 50s. It was when he was very young. I don't remember what years it was, but he's very old now. And he's in a monastery and he's in full retreat doing the traditions that we talked about, the Nyingma tradition and Dzogchen and practice called Chode and all these different practices. And basically, I talked to him a few years ago and he says, Doug, so glad you called because I'm not going to be talking to anybody for the rest of my life. So he's in retreat now. And they believed that is the way that you get to enlightenment. Now, I want to point something out. I said in the previous video that John, I'd be standing in the Tibetan Buddhist section and I'd be looking at, I don't know, John, what's your estimate? 5,000 books on Tibetan Buddhism or something? You think I'm exaggerating? There's a picture now out on the internet, which they found a library in a Sakyapa monastery. And it shows up on Facebook all the time. And I think we may post it here before too long. But it's a person standing in front of a gigantic wall of these Tibetan books. Now, Tibetan books are like this, about this big, and they're not, most of them aren't bound, some are bound, and they just turn the pages. Okay, so it's about this long, about this thick, on the wall, 84,000 of them, 84,000 rituals, deep initiations, empowerments, extraordinarily complex, beyond your imagination. I'm not even going to get into how complex this is, but if you know Tibetan Buddhism, I have literally been taught how to put the right Tibetan letter in each of the chakras and do a certain meditation, which has to be intoned perfectly. When you're doing Tibetan Buddhism, you have to have a very good ear. For instance, one mantra, Om 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 Zar Buddha Dikini Vajravanani Vajravara Chani Hum 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 Pe 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 Soha. You have to do it in that rhythm, in that tone, in that exact delivery. Okay. So in these 84,000 books, there are many of those things. And they say they can teach you to turn invisible, to levitate, all the things that people, materialists, think are the signs of spiritual enlightenment. Those are not the signs, but they are, side effects, as it were. Now, you might think 84,000, exaggeration. Incorrect. That's not an exaggeration. Buddha in Deer Park turned the wheel of Dharma. Dharma means teaching. So he turned the wheel of teaching 3 times. Each time he turned it, he either in the physical world or in the what we would call etheric world or in the astral world gave teachings to other Buddhists who had ascended. They were in physical body. They ascended into those worlds and got those teachings and brought them down. Okay. How many of them are there? How many ultimately, how many Tibetan Buddhist teachings are there in those rituals? 252,000, 3 times 84,000. So can you name anything else that complicated? That's the reason he did have to cajole me, because I didn't want to study Tibetan Buddhism. He'd go, oh yeah, here's this, look at this. And I go, oh, wait, that's a whole other thing. I'm trying to just study Tibetan Buddhism, and you give me the sources of Hindu philosophy that led into Tibetan Buddhism, and when Karmapa when Padmasambhava left India and went to Tibet, he started all these traditions, but it had existed since the beginning of history. These were prehistorical teachings that, as I said previously, the Buddha before the Buddha that most people recognize, Gautama Buddha or Sakyamuni Buddha, there was a Buddha before him, and there was a Buddha before him and before him. Okay, so the Buddha before the one that we know, his name was called Tampa Shinrab Miwache. And he has many teachings. Most of them have not been translated. And so I'm still waiting to get the original content. So what John cajoled me to start up as a study all those years ago has absorbed tremendous amount of time and energy and travel, because I've traveled to see these people when there'd be, the Kala Chakra initiation. Dalai Lama has given it, Gelek Rinpoche, all kinds of people have given it. I've had the Kala Chakra numerous times. I've had many of these initiations numerous times, and they just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. But we talked before about the fact that the essence is that if they're clairvoyant, these Tibetan lamas, do they see Christ active in the living realm around the earth right now? And as we pointed out, they do. They just give it different names. They give the name of Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, Kuan Yin, so on and so forth. So what we're talking about here is probably the most developed spiritual path that anyone can find on the earth. But I can assure you, you can study it all your life and still not attain it, understand it, nor attain enlightenment. Enlightenment is about morality. You can be struck with the golden moment of illumination or enlightenment without even knowing that you were on the path. So we can get into infinite details with you about this, but I'm going to say it again. If you take this book that we have done now, Spiritual Enlightenment Initiation, and you read it with a pure heart, if you have moral development already, you're going to find, highly likely, that you can transcend the physical world and move into the spiritual world simply by reading some of these, like the Garland of 108 Flowers, or any of these things that are in this book. You read them and they actually awaken your mental training and your heart and your action, and they awaken you to receive enlightenment. Now, when enlightenment comes, then you have to go to stage 2 and 3, which Rudolf Steiner calls initiation. And as we said before, Rudolf Steiner's basic books, Knowledge of Higher Worlds, The Stages of Higher Knowledge, Occult Science, and the other ones that we list here, there are basically 6 that I draw from to show, and I line up, here's Steiner's teachings, here's Tibetan Buddhist teachings. Lo and behold, don't they look very, very similar? Steiner did not steal it from them. He was perhaps aware of that tradition one way or the other, and then he advanced it and he put it into something that we can actually use in the modern age and make it applicable. So he basically, because all these terms, if I say to you, well, you know, you need to awaken your Nirmanakaya, and then you need to move into Sambhogakaya, and then you need to move into Dharmakaya. And as you do, you will see these, and the Tibetan Buddhists love lists. So here's the 10 endowments, here's the 10 awakenings, here's the 22 this and that, and here's the 108 this and that. And you're supposed to remember all of that, which is impossible unless you have one of these, what would you call it, very amazing memories that come through basically the group soul of Buddhism. And then what it is, I would say this to the monks, how can you remember all this? When you do it, when you start chanting and you start saying these words in Tibetan, you fall back, your eyes roll up, and there's this big thing that happens around your head. He goes, yes, 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 that is called the realm of illusion. And, and this realm of illusion, which is very good for Christians to understand. When you pray, if you attain anything spiritual and you try to keep it for yourself, it's going to backfire. You have to dedicate it to all beings. So every single prayer, I could chant so many of these for you in Tibetan or Hindi or English, it doesn't matter. But the point is that when you attain these things through these meditations, you are actually preparing yourself for enlightenment. And once you have enlightenment and you can actually create the space and empty the space, they call it emptiness. You have to attain emptiness. And then the clear light of bliss comes in, and then wisdom comes in, and then compassion comes in. But love is a gift of Christ. Christ is love. But if you ask a Tibetan Buddhist, do you believe in any beings who live on the sun? Because we Christians believe in the logos, the first, second, third logos. And the second logos Christ works from the realm of the sun in the past. Part of him is still in the sun, part is surrounding the earth now as the etheric life body of the earth. So if you ask a Tibetan Buddhist, are there any beings that y'all have contacted from the sun? They go, oh, yes. And they'll name a whole slew of things. And you go, well, how does that make any sense for you? And they really, honestly, they're the worst PR people for Buddhism, because they never explain things in terms that Westerners want to have it put in. They want the quick path. They want a nutshell. They want the whole thing very quickly. So there are phrases that you can use found in the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the garland of 108 flowers, all these different things, which some of them are found in the book that we've just produced. When you read them, it gives you a chance to really examine yourself and see if you're doing that. That's really what it is. It's a mental self-examination of your moral capacity. That is what Tibetan Buddhism can give you. And as Steiner points out in his books, From Buddha to Christ, numerous other books that are focused on Buddhism, as well as many, many, many references to Buddhism throughout his other lectures and books, you can begin to get a handle on this and understand the importance of Buddha. But remember, Christ is Buddha's boss. Okay? Christ is so far above Buddha, it is ridiculous. But Buddha can, as Steiner says, he was one of the greatest thinkers of all times. He can get you on the path to self-awakening, to the path of ascension, to the path of enlightenment. And when that happens, once you've been enlightened, then it's easier to get onto the path of self-initiation. But as Steiner points out, the 3 stages: preparation, or he calls it catharsis, first stage; second stage, enlightenment; third stage, initiation. Those are the stages that he describes in psychological, mental, and physical terms so that Westerners can actually get a handle on what it was that Buddha was trying to give in his 252,000 teachings. Now, they'll tell you that the being of Buddha works through other avatars and other bodhisattvas and other Buddhas and arahats and yoginis and dakinis and you name it. There's 1,000 names for these beings. But what Steiner is pointing out is that all of these beings can be reached because they're part of the spiritual hierarchy and what we would call the communion of saints. So the Buddhist saints are marvelous. Now, I want to correct something I said in the previous video. I said very few anthroposophists ever talk about Buddha. No, but they do talk about the Maitreya Buddha. And let me explain this. Before you can become a Buddha, you have to take the vow of the Bodhisattva or the vow of Bodhicitta, which means that for the sake of all sentient beings, you seek enlightenment, not for your own personal gratification. You pray in Tibetan Buddhism that you become like the Buddha so that you can help all other beings exactly as Buddha did when he sat under the Bodhi tree and gave out his teachings, or when he was in Deer Park and gave out the teachings and turned this wheel of Dharma 3 times. So Steiner has linked up with the spiritual teachings of the past, and the most focused would be, of course, ancient Hindu, taken from Upanishads, taken from the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, but also Tibetan Buddhism. And literally, I would say that inside of Steiner's teachings, which we have enumerated here, and we actually made the list. This is what Steiner says. This is what the Tibetan Buddhists say in Lam Rin. It's called the 7-limb practice, or the Lam Rin, or the Lo Jiang, or Dzogchen. When you study these things of Steiner's, you're actually studying those things, but you're studying them with a Christian impulse. So it is imperative, Rudolf Steiner said, that you understand the prior stages of compassion that Buddhism teaches, and then you can move into the stage of love, which is the seventh stage of this development. So Buddhism can actually take you 6/7 of the way, but the more difficult task is pure love, which then basically makes all the rest look like a shadow of the light of the sun.
Yes, and it gets down to that difference between considering being and being itself. That when you become that which you aspire, that it's different, but yet it's the same. And so this kind of a conundrum, Novalis addresses this, and he says, romanticizing is nothing but a qualitative increase to a higher power. By means of this operation, the lower self becomes one with a better self. We ourselves are a product of just such a series of qualitative increases. This operation is yet entirely unknown. I romanticize the world to the extent that I give the commonplace a higher meaning, the ordinary a mystery-laden aspect, the known the dignity of the unknown, and the finite the luster of infinity. The operation for the higher, the unknown, the mystical, and the eternal is just the opposite. By means of this connection, these undergo a logarithmic change. They assume an everyday aspect.
In Tibetan Buddhism, those stages are called Mantrayana, Sutrayana, Mantrayana, Vajrayana, Tantrayana. Now, when you say Tantra, it has nothing to do with sex. So if you've ever been told that Tantrayana is sexual, then you are being taught by a very bad teacher. As a matter of fact, you will notice that on the outside of many Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, there will be women, men and women in what they call yabyong, which means they're having sex in different positions, 64 different positions. That isn't sex. Those are the petals in the lower chakra that they believe. The lower chakra was supposed to be developed in your past incarnations, and it has 64 petals. So those Sexual positions are the way that you unite your soul with your spirit. It has nothing to do with sex. And mind you, I have the highest Yoga Tantra initiation from two different schools, Sakya and Galuk. And basically, you are looking at Vajrayogini, who is a naked woman. But if you have one sexual thought, and this is a tantric path, if you have one sexual thought, she takes the curved knife, the taiguk, in her hand and chops off your head and strings it around on a thread around her neck that has 108 heads of the other people who thought sex when they looked at a naked woman. When you look at a naked woman and you have lust, you've missed the whole point. Women are the divine on the earth. They are the reason that there's life on the earth. And there's no such thing as any tantric practitioner having sex with more than one person, period. So when you hear people talk about tantra and they talk about sex, they don't know what they're talking about. Yab Yum is with one person. So when you get the highest yoga tantra, and it can be male or female, the female is Vajrayogini, Gayo Samaja is the male, and the female, you can do it without a partner. So there's no partner at all. There's no sex whatsoever in the highest yoga tantra. And what you're really doing, as I said, merging your soul with your spirit, and they're basically wedding each other. And so they show them coupled, and they call it Yab Yum. But that's not what it's about. Sutrayana is developing your morality, okay? And how do you develop morality? You read these beautiful teachings, or the turning of the wheel of Dharma, or you get an initiation or a ritual or an empowerment from a Buddhist. And what happens? It prepares you to have the images of spiritual things without having the material follow behind them. So if you have a spiritual, naked 16-year-old juvescent woman who is who has broken the neck of pride, standing on compassion, and she's engulfed by the flames of wisdom and all these different parts of her. She has a cross over her shoulder. She's naked. She's all red with a white tongue. She wears a crown of the five Buddhas, the five Buddha families. And each one of these elements that you visualize increases your capacity to visualize. But you must have purity as you are visualizing them, or it actually will work against you. So if someone gets a tantric text, and I have numerous tantric texts directly given to me by Tibetan Buddhists, if I'm looking at those pictures and I think anything sexual, it actually harms me. So these practices are very advanced, but they're ancient, and they don't have the Christian element to them. And Christ is the Lord of karma. Christ is the Lord of love. And if you look at a naked person and you think sex, then you don't love them. You're thinking basically of conquering them. You're thinking of domination. If you have one speck of that, you can't go past stage one, called Sutrayana. Then you go to stage two, just as Novalis pointed out. The path of ascension has stages. The second stage is called Mantrayana. So you chant mantras like Om 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 Sarabhuta Dikini Vajravanani Vajrava Chaniya Hum Om Om Pe 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 Soha. So you do that thousands of times. Well, that's this. Tibetan Buddhists say that once you create emptiness, light can come in, sound can come in, and then the word, or for Christians, we'd call that love. But anyway, in the first stage, Sutrayana, that's the images, that's the light, that's the pictures. Mantrayana is the sound. Those are sacred sounds. Rudolf Steiner pointed out that even Latin was more sacred than our modern languages. But if you go back to ancient Tibetan language, which is monosyllabic, or you go back to the language of the Buddha before Gautama Buddha, Tampa Shinrab Miwache, it's in the language of Zhangzhung, which for many years until recently, they said didn't even exist. They said Tampa Shinrab Miwache didn't exist because why? They were hiding the fact that the first Tibetan schools wiped out the Bonpo people, completely absorbed their teachings, and transformed it into a male priesthood. Now, mind you, there are female priests in the Tibetan tradition, but it's a different tradition altogether. I've met some of those people. I've met Tulkus of Vajrayogini. I've met people who were female lamas. And it's a different tradition altogether. But the second stage is mantrayana. And what happens is you chant these mantras. It's kind of like singing sacred songs or praying out loud. It's evoking spiritual beings. The third stage is called Vajrayana, and Vajra means tool. So it's spiritual tools that you can use. Well, the Bible describes the spiritual armor you can put on yourself to protect yourself and be a courageous warrior for Christ. These tools would have, there's many Vajra tools, but you could look at them and have no idea what they are, like a Vishvu Vajra. It's two dorjes put together in a cross. But if you don't know how to work it, it isn't going to do nothing for you. So you don't get that teaching until you enter Vajrayana, which means some teacher has to accept you into a higher level and a higher stage, and they have to say, yes, you've attained the results of the first two stages of Sutrayana, Mantrayana, so I will give you the Vajrayana tools. Now, beyond that is Tantrayana. And as I said, I barely know anyone in the West who understands Tantrayana. Now, even great Buddhist scholars don't understand it because Tantrayana is completely transcendent of the material world. So you actually cannot use anything that you ever derived from the material world through perception in Tantrayana. You are doing what we call visualizing, evoking, and embodying the goddess, or whoever it is, Vajrayogini or Buddha, whoever it is that you are worshiping. Now, those stages are the same stages as Sutrayana, Mantrayana, Vajrayana. And so as you go into Tantrayana, you are actually leaving behind the physical world, and you are what is called deity worship. You're embodying that deity, whether it be Manjushri, Chenrezig, Vajrayogini, Buddha, any of the beings that they do worship them, but in essence, they worship them to the point that they become them. They visualize themselves as them. They speak the mantras that they speak. They use the very same tools that these spiritual beings that you're worshiping, these deities that you're worshiping, use. But then the union is completely different. The union in Tantrayana basically is the results of ascension. And if you understand these four stages, then you can not only pass through preparation, as Steiner calls it, pass through enlightenment, which could happen at any of those stages, and move into the stage of initiation. Now, who's going to initiate you? Well, the Buddhists would say, here's 252,000 ways we can initiate you or give you a ritual or an empowerment, because they're all written down. Now, where did they get them? These were high tantric monks who united with spiritual being, oftentimes Buddha, in the spiritual world, in Tushita heaven, in Shambhala. And then they get this download, they get a transmission from Buddha, and they write it down. And if you took those 252,000 books that I mentioned, 84,000 of them in that one library, they're all consistent. It came from one source. They don't disagree. They may say a little bit different, like an offering pot may look a little bit different from one tradition to the other, or the specific tool that you use, or the mandala might be a little bit different. But in essence, it's the same thing. It's the same teaching. Why? Because the spiritual world is consistent and it is immortal. It's eternal. It keeps adding to itself. But in fact, if someone was clairvoyant, no matter whether they were Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Tibetan, Hindu, it doesn't matter. They should arrive at the same moral principles, the golden rule. They should arrive at the point that they understand that they are developing compassion so that they can have love for all beings. And when you have compassion in the first three stages, then love comes in the last stage. And that's why the West is so confused, because they followed the path of perdition and they think love is sex. Love is not sex at all. It has nothing to do with it. Love does what all things that are alive do. They wish to become more of themselves. So love wishes to become more of itself, and you cannot love unless you have another person to give love to. Love flows through you. Love is not you. Love is not an emotion. It is a willpower action. And when this happens and you actually can go on these 4 stages and get to the top stage, you are directly communing with the same beings that taught all of these people to write down these teachings, and Buddha was communing with those beings and gave those teachings. So really, I'm saying that comparative religion and my study in comparative religion shows me that there's a golden thread that goes through all traditional religions, and it's there for Buddhism and Christianity as well as all the others. It's just that you look at Buddhism, even the last transmissions of Buddhism was in about 1500. The first transmissions of Buddhism was Bampo, which was 10,000 BC. Well, that was long before Christ. But do they refer to Christ? Well, they refer to the beings that are coming down from the sun. They literally say that once you can create emptiness, all you have to do, this is shocking, is understand the sun. Period. Because what does the sun give us? Warmth, light, and ultimately, if you're able to understand it, love. Does the sun not love every being on the face of the earth?
Yeah, and you can carry it further. You can change your point of focus. Say, for example, let's try ancient Egypt, of which Rudolf Steiner said very little, actually. I mean, there's a few lecture cycles where he does deal with the Egyptian mysteries. But during the course of that, he just happens to say that it had the greatest impact on the development of Christianity. And you go, no, hey, wait a minute. I mean, here's something that he didn't address that much, but he did address. And then he goes on to say that it had the greatest impact on Christianity. And you go, oh, what does that mean? Well, it had to do, again, when we look at the work of Rudolf Steiner and his 36 and a half feet of shelf space of his collected edition, and then you see that it's like what Douglas was saying about the Tibetan Buddhist archive, it has internal consistency. And so the very fact that it's internally consistent speaks volume as to the reality of what it is, that it really is what it says it is, that it is something that is a direct relationship to the things in which it addresses. And so you have to treat it with a great deal of respect. And likewise with the Buddhist teachings. And like what Douglas is saying is that if you take and you take the shadow image of what is being represented on the temples, with all the various modalities, the 64 copulations, if you misinterpret that, you totally miss the boat. But yet there is that element. And it's very interesting because like Navala says, he says, feeling appears first, reflection appears secondarily. Why? The first kiss is, from this perspective, the principle of philosophy, the origin of a new world. So, I mean, you look at that and you could spend all day trying to figure out this riddle that Novalis is putting forward. And that's the essence of what we're trying to get people to understand here, is that this is something that you will take in like a spectator, like the way you sit down, you watch a movie and you're entertained and all that. You have to participate. It requires that you, out of your own being, bring something to the table to where you can take these ideas and see how they interact with each other. And that's what we did quite a bit of the heavy lifting in this series, because you can see the juxtaposition of statements by Rudolf Steiner in different lecture cycles regarding various subjects, innumerable subjects. Of course, Why those subjects? Well, those are the questions that people asked him. So if he didn't deal with a topic very much, that's because people didn't ask him questions. And so we just have to be able to be very, very circumspect when approaching these materials.
Absolutely. And if we're careful, we can, as we study comparative religion, we can begin to see that golden thread. Now, for instance, Buddhism, it all begins on taking refuge. What does taking refuge means? It means I take refuge to the Buddha. Who's the Buddha? The Buddha is your I am. So Buddhists say, I take refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I take refuge means my I am to the Buddha means you're going to try to be like Buddha. The Dharma, you're going to study the teachings of spirituality and ascension. And the Sangha means the group of people who are part of your temple or part of your group that are all studying together. So those four stages by Steiner would be called the I, the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body. And so when you put these in modern terms, and then Steiner characterizes these things, he never gives you formulas. Matter of fact, what's it taken me? 40 years to figure out that as you read these things of Steiner, if you extract the core content and you make a list, it looks exactly like the list of the Tibetan Buddhists in terms of ascension and what you have to go through. So you can look in this book, and we've compared Lojong and Lam Rin and Dzogchen to Steiner's teachings, and Steiner aligns with that, but he goes further because why? His are modern teachings. They're not teachings of the past. So is there such thing as a true Tibetan lineage that would be able to be the most effective tool to get you into the spiritual world and on the path of ascension? No. I've met them. And some of them are enlightened, some of them aren't enlightened. The highest ones, they're all clairvoyant. A clairvoyant knows a clairvoyant. I would walk into any teaching I've ever gone to, and that's why I stopped going to these things. One time I went to the temple out in Ann Arbor, Tobtung Rinpoche was there. I'd never met him before. He's in the middle and I came in late. So I'm sneaking in, and I'm trying to get in the back so he doesn't notice me. One eye pops open and he goes, Zangpo Wongpo, come here. He stops the teaching, come here. And I'm going, this is exactly what I didn't want to have happen. I waited till his eyes were closed, and he's chanting, and right in the middle of it, his eye pops open and says, Zangpo, come here. And I'm going, okay, I'm not telling you that name in case you went to look it up, because I don't believe I am that person. And especially because that was a toku of, well, I'm not even going to go into that either. But the point is that what they would call me, I never understood it for a long, long, long time, even when they tried to explain it to me or tell me who I was, or, oh, you're a great leader of the great Tantra school of Longzang Drugpa. No, well, no, no. My name's Doug Gabriel, and I'm a jerk, and I'm a Westerner, and I'm American, and I'm a Christian. And if it wasn't for Christ, I wouldn't be anything. And they're looking at me, of course. Oh, they just laugh. They never get worried about anything you say. You could go in there and cuss them out, and they just go, "Oh, that anger makes you look like a dog's rear." They have all these amazing things which are so accurate. It just blows your mind. So as you're doing this thing, okay, or you're saying Om Mani Padme Hum, that means hail thou jewel in the heart of the lotus. What does that mean? Hail thou jewel in the heart of the lotus. The lotus is your heart, and the jewel is called the wish-fulfilling stone. So the being who represents Christ in Tibetan Buddhism is Avalokiteshvara, and he holds his hand, two of his 1,000 hands, over his heart. And what's in the hand? The wish-fulfilling stone. Boy, Westerners would love to have a wish-fulfilling stone. They'd wish for invisibility so they could go into the girls' locker room. They'd wish for a lot of money. They'd wish for a big house. No, the only wish you can have on the spiritual path is to reach enlightenment, not for your sake, but for the sake of all of the sentient beings. So let's describe a myth that goes to the origins of Buddhism. The Buddhists believe that in the beginning, a fiery box fell from the sky to the earth. By the way, that box is your heart. And in the box were four things: a stupa, the Prajnaparamita, the Book of Wisdom, the begging bowl of Buddha, and the wish-fulfilling stone called the Sintamani stone. Okay, so what are those? The stupa is your body. If you look at a stupa, it has the same proportions as your head to your torso to your limbs, okay? It is a perfect picture. So all stupas are based, true stupas are based upon exact geometry that reflects literally the perfected nature of your physical body. We're not perfected. We haven't perfected the physical body yet. So there's the image of what we're aiming for. First thing.
A stupa, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is a Buddhist shrine.
Yes, it's like it doesn't, they consider it a temple because the spirit comes to dwell in it, but it can be this big, it can be huge. There's some in Nepal that are gigantic. So what is a stupa? A stupa is an image that we're supposed to be meditating on that we will become in the future. Okay? What's this? So really, what is that? That's your physical body. So then what's the second thing that was found in the box? By the way, the story says that three young men, sons of the king, went out to get the box. The first one that touched it, he burnt up. The second one touched it, he burnt up. The third one who touched it, he understood it, was able to open it and do something with it and help it manifest. That's because he had reached enlightenment and he had morality. So the second thing is the Prajnaparamita, which is the book of wisdom, but it's a really big book. There's not just one book of wisdom. And Prajnaparamita is a being, as John said. So truth and this wisdom is a being. Rudolf Steiner says that being is Sophia, and she comes from the realm of the Kyrieutetes, the hierarchical, spiritual hierarchical rank of the beings of wisdom. Same thing. But the male version is Manjushri, and I could say 1,000 things about it. So the third thing that is in the box is the begging bowl of Buddha. Well, the second thing is what? That's your etheric body. Your etheric body is filled with wisdom. It has all the wisdom. When you're born, your etheric body has all the wisdom of the cosmos. As you grow older, it grows younger. So when you're born, you're as wise in the first 3 years as you will ever be, because Christ's etheric body surrounds you and teaches you to stand upright, to speak, and to think. Those are the gifts of Christ to a child between age birth and 3. Well, that's the Prajnaparamita. That's what they're trying to say. These 252,000 teachings of Buddha on the physical plane, the etheric plane, the astral plane, the plane of the ego. Those are basically showing you the path of ascension, and that's the path of wisdom. And the bowl is showing you need to be empty. The bowl is empty. And so when you're a beggar, and Buddha used that bowl, remember, Chandra gave Buddha, when he put in his empty bowl, some tainted pork. Buddha ate it, and supposedly that's what killed him, because he had karma with Chandra, this person who was making what he thought was a good offering to the Buddha. And then the Buddha says, well, the reason that it killed me is because in a past life I was a tiger, and I stepped on a blade of grass, and the blade of grass came down on an ant and chopped him in half. I'm the tiger, Chandra's the ant. I owed this to him. That's why he killed me. To kill a Buddha is the greatest crime there is, unless his death leads to enlightenment, and it's the greatest thing you can do. So Chandra, by killing the Buddha, by giving him poisoned pork, actually transcended by doing so and gave Buddha a chance to leave his body. So that's what the begging bowl is. This very begging bowl is still worshipped. It's in Sri Lanka right now. There's actually 2 of them. They claim to be the begging bowl of Buddha. But what is that? That is what's called the vase. It's called your chi. You probably know it as chi. 2 fingers below your belly button is where your energy arises from your nutrition. And that's called chi. Well, that's the begging bowl. And you have to empty it so it can be filled. And when you do that, and the spiritual practices are extraordinarily complicated. As a matter of fact, the tantric practices of melting there's 3 streams that go up your spine, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. Well, when one's male, female, and the middle one is combining, one is white, one is red, and when they combine, they create pink. And as you bring this up to your heart, that's what starts your spiritual process of initiation. It starts from the begging bowl of Buddha down in that in your lower chakras. So that's what the bowl represents. And the fourth thing that was there was this wish-fulfilling stone. Now, people who know me know that I'm obsessed with collecting grails and stones, crystals. Because why? To me, it reminds me of spiritual things. And so I use them as a tool. I say, aha, I hold this double terminated crystal at my heart, and it's the wish-fulfilling stone, and my only wish is that I reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay, so it actually creates what Steiner calls the frontal spinal column, from your heart to your throat to your brow to your crown chakra into the illusory realm. So this Sintamani stone, this wish-fulfilling stone, is an amazing thing, and that's what Buddha's referring to, and Buddhists are referring to when they say, "Hail, thou jewel in the heart of the lotus." In other words, hail thou spiritual intent in your heart to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So these four things are there. So what is that? Well, the bowl is your astral body. When you empty yourself of astral desires, personal selfish desires, you're empty, and then you can create that emptiness that the clear light of bliss can enter, and then wisdom can be given to you, and then the lights, the sounds, and the word come as a manifestation of that. And that's what the stupa, the book of wisdom, the begging bowl, and the Sintamani stone, the wish-fulfilling stone, actually represent. It represents your I am, your astral body, your etheric body, and your physical body. So there you have anthroposophy in a nutshell in Tibetan Buddhism. How many times have I ever heard a Buddhist refer to that myth? 0 times. That's what they should always start off with. If they did, then listen, John can confirm this. Gelek Rinpoche, one of the greatest teachers, he is the voice incarnation of the Panchen Lama, the elder tutor of the Dalai Lama. And he's our guru. And John studied with him. We studied with him for decades, okay? He has passed away since then. But basically, he was what's called crazy wisdom. He was an amazing person. Now, John's going to start to tell you crazy wisdom stories, and let me tell you, they are crazy. We have both been subject to this voraciously by Gelek Rinpoche to awaken us. It's like whacking you on the head to wake you up, because in Africa, they have what are called initiation clubs. And they hit you on the head. And when you see the stars, like if you hit yourself really hard, you see the stars, you're supposed to concentrate on those stars and don't let them dissolve. That's initiation in Africa in the old days, getting hit in the head. Well, it's the same kind of thing. Crazy wisdom is to wake you up. And so I'll tell one quick story, then let John tell you a bunch. We go out to have a scheduled barbecue with Gelek Rinpoche out in the park. And it's raining cats and dogs. It's so bad. They're all saying, "No, Gelek, we can't, Rinpoche, we can't go out there. We're all going to get wet." And he goes, "Oh, no, I take care of that." And he's like, "What?" By the way, when I met Gelek Rinpoche, he could barely speak English. So sometimes when I imitate his speech, it's because I love him so much. This man became a professor at the University of Michigan, professor at all kinds of places, learned English, wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and you always surprised by him. But anyway, he's the most loving, compassionate person you'd ever want to meet. But he will wake you up, and he would wake us up in really, really bizarre ways. So we're going out to the barbecue, and I'm the only one who believes what he kept saying. "I'll take care of that." So we get out. We're in the car together. We get out. We go out to where we're going to have the picnic. Everyone's in their cars. No one will get out in the pouring rain. He walks over there, and he goes, I said, "Should I put the chicken on?" And he goes, and by the way, they're supposed to be vegetarian. None of them are. So I said, "Should I put the chicken on?" He goes, "No, just a second." And because I'm clairvoyant, I saw what he did. He puts his hands up and he goes, no, he says, what one did he use? He used this special mantra. And then I could see him. He visualized the double cross, the double dorje. And I'd never seen him do this before. It came off the top of his head, came out in front of him. and they were all spinning kind of different directions and different colors, and you could even see Tibetan letters on them dancing. And he starts to project this into the cloud. The clouds open, the rain stops, but only right where he's. And then he turns to me and says, "You can barbecue now." I look back at the people in the car. It's still pouring down rain. No one will get out of their cars. I mean, literally, we're only talking a strip of maybe 10 feet, 20 feet, where the rain stopped, the clouds opened, and you could see the sun. But on each side of Rinpoche and in front and back of him, it was still pouring down rain. And I just said, "Rinpoche, what did you just do?" And he goes, "Oh, someday I'll teach you how to use a Vajra tool." He never did, by the way. But this is the power these people have. They have the power to transform you in a moment if you are already prepared through your morality.
Yes, but he was so unassuming you wouldn't know that. And yeah, I don't know, by the time you get around to where I raise my finger, all these other pieces of the puzzle fall on the table. But I was going to share at that time this whole idea, and this is from Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, where he's talking about Immanuel Kant's thesis about being. And he says, being cannot be. Were it to be, it would no longer remain being, but would become a being, an entity. And so you see that really encapsulates what we're talking about, that there's this actual uh, presence of beings. And so when you see something like the story he just told about Gaelic Rinpoche, and I can share stories like that too that are similar, is that we're in a universe of dynamic living forces and beings. And if you think that this is all just some kind of a process that's derivative of just like some kind of mechanical fields, and they get all the physicists get into all this, there is that, and they can find kind of a symptomology that equates to that view of the world, but it's only partial. And so when we start examining these things, the closer we get, the more they recede, because the more you find out, the more you realize, like Socrates, I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. And so what does one do in the face of that? Well, Rudolf Steiner, he pointed back to the relationship between Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Friedrich Schiller. And Friedrich Schiller wrote a series of letters on aesthetic education. And basically what he did was he said, okay, well, we have our worldview based on our mind, on our brain, but if we totally succumb to that, we're no longer free. And then I have this relationship to the world that's based on all the forces that are beneath the heart, that whole realm of the will and the unconscious longing and the drives and desires. And if you serve that, you're no longer free. He says, in fact, the only time when you're truly free is when you are experiencing or creating art. And that is the realm in which one finds freedom, because you're allowing both of these other realms to interact with you, but in a playful way, and in a way that is artistic, and that you're attempting to try and find the aesthetic of love. And that it's that, again, I frequently bring up the threefold mission that Rudolf Steiner talks about, where he talks about wisdom, strength, and beauty. And so we see that beauty aspect, that is that central pillar. That is the point at which we come to realize that it's how we participate in this drama, the types of forces that we bring to bear within our consciousness, and the way in which we act with other people. like as in the Buddhist stream, it's for doing it for all sentient beings is the way they encapsulate it. But to do it in a way that brings about clarity. In our first encounter with the Dalai Lama, Douglas and I'm introducing him to Thomas Banyaka, the spokesman for the Hopi elders, the Kachina. And Thomas Banyaka, he did a ritual for me he had some corn and he prayed some words, and he dropped the corn on my hand and the person that was with me. And after he did that, the gentleman whose home it was in, he said, well, he did that over a brook, and the brook bubbled in response. And so we're in a world of very real beings, but if you ignore them, they will ignore you. And so you'll never know they're there. And so when one comes to this whole idea of enlightenment and what is that, it's important to understand, because it's an experience I went through when I was, 18, 19 years old. And I happened to look out the window at a particular angle of refraction, and there was a light refracting, and it opened up into this whole experience. And I felt as if I was being approached by a beingness that was 10,000 times brighter than the sun. But yet, on a certain level, I was that being, but on another level, I was not. And so I was presented with this kind of a dichotomy that enabled me to appreciate that whole idea that Schiller is really trying to address on a very fundamental level, from a philosophical viewpoint, of that there's that which comes from above, and it meets that which arises from below. And of course, you can say from below, that'd be the human realm, and from above, that's the realm of the avatar.
Gelek Rinpoche used to do this to me. John's seen him do it many times, probably. Whenever he'd see me, he'd grab me by my little goatee or whatever, this little thing here, and he'd pull me close and he'd kiss me on the lips over and over again. And I'd go, oh man, this is so embarrassing. And people are watching him. They go, oh, I wish he'd stop. I wish he'd stop. He's the big guru. I can't tell him. I'm supposed to have guru devotion, and let me explain guru devotion. Guru devotion doesn't mean that you believe that Lama is perfect. But you're supposed to search around for teachers, just like with Rudolf Steiner, search around for teachers, and you find your teacher. And then you emulate them. But when you emulate them, you no longer can criticize them, because if you do, you decrease the potency that's going to come from you emulating them. So you have to hold them in the highest regard. And as you do this, it's basically a form of guru devotion. So many people have that for Rudolf Steiner. They follow him. They don't know why. They don't understand his teachings. And as I said before, out of all the hundreds of people that Gelek Rinpoche taught, how many people got what he was teaching? A small handful. Westerners don't get it. So many teachers from the East come to the West and they'll all tell you the same thing. The materialism in the West is so bad that, we could stay in the East and teach the people who are, mid-range, high range. No, we got to go to the lowest. And we go to America, not because America deserves it. It's because America is following the path of perdition, and they come here. And what happens to some of these teachers? They become materialists. Some of the worst materialists, they become monsters. And so you have to be very careful who you choose to be your teacher. So even with Rudolf Steiner, some people call him a racist, a Nazi, all these horrible things. None of that's true. And obviously, you're not going to get nothing from his teachings if that's what you think about him. So you have to hold these people in high esteem. And so Gelek Rinpoche was constantly doing these crazy things. One day I came with a taiguk on a necklace, and he turned and he saw it to me. I think he might have been there. He freaked out. He goes, taiguk! And he jumps up in the air on top of me like Yab Yum, like we're having sex. And he's kissing me on the lips over and over and over again. Taiguk, taiguk, taiguk. I'm going, okay, I guess I should find out what a taiguk is. I bought it because I thought it was a pretty piece of jewelry, So then eventually I did find out. And now I understand what he was trying to say is, why are you wearing a taiguk, you fool? You don't even know what it is. And because you're wearing it, you don't know what it is. It's supposed to chop your head off. And I didn't get that. Now,
Yeah, I
Tyler,
remember the first time I met Gelek Rinpoche is he grabbed me by my finger and he's walking around the room meeting all these people and he's dragging me behind him. And I'm like, what in the world? But that's that crazy wisdom. They have to kind of kind of shake you up a little bit, get you to come to a point of clarity. It's like the Dalai Lama once said to the three of us. Robert asked him a question and he leaned over respectfully, listened intently, and then said, more important than being smart, being clear.
I love it. What did the Dalai Lama say? They said, what is your teaching about? He says, only one thing: be kind to one another. And if you ask him if he's a big, highfalutin lama, he'll say, no, 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 I am a humble monk. And there will be no more Dalai Lamas. And I am just a humble monk. I'm no more than you are. But they have powers over the elemental beings. They have association communion with higher beings. And they have magic because these come from shamanistic traditions. So they have a thing called the 100-syllable mantra that if they say, if you chant this enough, no matter what illness you have, it will go away. And Tyler asked me to do some chanting, Tibetan chanting, to give you a sample of that. So I will, because I have forgotten it, because it's rather complicated, but I will share this with you. It goes, Om Vajra Sattva Samaya Anupalaya Vajra Sattva Tino Pishta Dredo Me Bhadava Sutrasoya Me Bhadava Sutrasoya Me Bhadava Anurakta Me Bhadava Sara Siddham Me Pariyacha Sara Masukama Chittam Shiryu Kuru Hum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Saravaja Taragata Vajasata Ma Me Mucha Vajra Bhava Mahasamayat Sakta Ah. Now, I could translate that for you, but it doesn't matter. They want you to chant it in Tibetan. So here you're chanting something, you don't know what it means. And I've watched people be healed from this. And so they have incredible elemental power. Their traditions go very far back because in the far past, people were clairvoyant. So many of these things that they teach come from clairvoyance. And that's the reason so many Westerners cannot even approach it. They cannot get near it. They will tell you they practice Tibetan Buddhism. Ask them a single question, they don't know anything about Tibetan Buddhism. So I'm not promoting Tibetan Buddhism. I'm promoting Christianity. But in this book, we needed to connect Rudolf Steiner's teachings with what he gives us astounding insight into Buddha, what happened after Buddha's ascension, what happened with Buddha and St. Francis, what happened with the great master beings in Buddha, what happened with St. Francis and Buddha going to Mars to try to conquer the martial, aggressive actions of our times. Steiner describes all of these things in terms that he characterizes so that you can understand them. Most of Tibetan Buddhism, though it may be true, it may be insightful, may come from clairvoyance, doesn't necessarily apply to the modern world unless you can put it in perspective and understand that these ancient lineages going back to 10,000 BC do have a lot of wisdom, but it isn't necessarily applicable in the modern world. The way for ascension is, yes, to use the mental path described by Tibetan Buddhism, but it's very similar to the mental path of Rudolf Steiner. If I was to suggest to you one or the other, hands down, I would suggest Rudolf Steiner. So, John, thank you so much for being here today to discuss this, and thank you for convincing me to try to synthesize this wisdom and put it in a book so that people can understand it.
Yes, and as Novalis says, out of laziness, the human being demands mechanical ease or mere magic. He doesn't want to be active, to use his creative imagination.
Precisely. Thank you so much. And thank all of you in our audience, and thank Tyler, our producer, and thank anyone who convinced me to actually focus on these things and write these books up so that we could create the From the Works of Rudolf Steiner series, so that we could try to make it digestible for you, but also to connect it with ancient wisdom as well as the wisdom that you can use in the modern day.